The studio lights glared like miniature suns, each beam engineered not just to illuminate but to expose. Every surface of the stage shimmered under their intensity, the polished desk, the chrome-framed chairs, even the reflective sheen of Donald Trump's meticulously combed hair. The cameras stood like unblinking sentinels, their red lights burning with the promise of a world watching. Behind thick glass, the control room buzzed in hushed chaos, producers counting down, sound engineers checking levels, assistants rushing to distribute last-minute notes. Stand by. Live in 5, 4, 3. The countdown melted into silence as the broadcast cut across the globe. Millions tuned in from New York to Lagos, from Ouagadougou to Shanghai. This was not just another televised debate. It was an event branded as the conversation of the century, a rare direct clash between a former US President, Donald J. Trump, and one of Africa's fastest rising leaders, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Trump leaned forward in his chair, body angled toward the camera as if he were already campaigning. His signature grin stretched wide, exuding confidence tinged with disdain. The red light above the main lens turned on. The moderator, a seasoned journalist whose reputation for control under pressure was legendary, inhaled, ready to deliver her opening line. But Trump didn't wait. "Let's get one thing straight," he interrupted, pointing a finger at the split screen that displayed Traoré live from Ouagadougou. His voice boomed with the cadence of a rally speech rather than a debate. "People like you should sit down and learn. America built the world you're benefiting from. We did the work, and you're just playing catch-up. So stop acting like you know better than us." The words hit like a hammer. Gasps rippled through the live studio audience. Some chuckled nervously, unsure whether they were witnessing political theater or a verbal ambush. The moderator froze mid-sentence, lips parted but soundless. On the other half of the screen, Ibrahim Traoré didn't blink. His posture was still, his hands folded neatly on the desk, his uniform immaculate. His eyes, sharp, unflinching, locked onto the camera lens as if it were Trump himself. For a brief moment, the world seemed suspended, waiting for the young African leader's reply. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, deliberate, and piercing. "If you truly built the world," Traoré said evenly, "then you should know how to listen to it. So instead of telling us to sit down and learn, stand up and listen." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. No one moved. Not the moderator, not the studio audience, not even the technicians in the control room. For 2 full seconds, it felt as if the globe itself held its breath. Then, like sparks on dry grass, the reaction spread. The live chat on the broadcast exploded with hashtags. Hashtag stand up and listen. Within minutes, clips of Traoré's reply were clipped, captioned, and catapulted across TikTok, Twitter, and Telegram. The phrase became a rallying cry in real time, flooding timelines with fire emojis and lightning bolt gifs. In the control room, one producer murmured, almost to herself, he flipped the entire narrative in one sentence. Back on set, Trump leaned back, clearly irritated. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles blanching under the pressure. Across Africa, people weren't just watching, they were smiling. In cafes from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, students leaned closer to flickering televisions. In living rooms across Johannesburg, families exchanged glances that spoke louder than cheers. The moderator finally regained her voice, her professionalism stretched thin by the weight of what had just unfolded. "Mr. Trump, Mr. Traoré, let's keep this discussion constructive. President Trump, do you wish to respond?" Trump smirked. He didn't even allow the full question to hang in the air. "I don't need to respond. I know exactly how this works." He talks about truth and listening, but his country still relies on American support. They wouldn't last 6 months without us. 6 months. That's a fact. He jabbed a finger toward the camera as if speaking directly into Traoré's eyes. "So before you start giving speeches, maybe try building something on your own first." The words landed like a punch. Viewers worldwide waited for the young African leader to fire back with anger, to meet Trump's thunder with thunder. But Traoré didn't. He remained still, letting the accusations settle in the air like dust. When he did reply, his voice was low, almost quiet, but every syllable carried more weight than shouting could have. "We are building," Traoré said. clinics built with our own hands, schools funded with our own resources, roads paved with the strength of our people, not with permission. His gaze sharpened. We are not the ones who need 6 months. We have already survived 6 centuries of people like you telling us where to stand. Trump's grin faltered, shifting into something tighter, forced. Sure you did, he replied sarcastically. That's why everyone still comes to us for help. Traoré didn't blink. They came to you because for a long time, they had no other choice. Today, they do. The moderator shuffled her notes, realizing that the debate had already veered far from script. In a cafe in Dar es Salaam, a young man paused the live stream on his phone and turned to his friends. For the first time, he whispered. Someone told him to listen. Trump leaned forward, his irritation now visible in the hardening of his jawline. The moderator tried again, her voice careful, diplomatic. Mr. Trump, perhaps we can. Tell me, Captain, Trump interrupted, using Traoré's military title with an edge sharp enough to wound. If you're so independent, why do you still trade with American companies? Why do you still use American currency and American systems? You talk about freedom, but you're still standing on a foundation we built. He leaned back, clearly satisfied with his trap. So which is it? Independence or dependence? The question hovered in the studio like smoke. For a moment, it seemed to corner Traoré, to force him into either contradiction or concession. But the young leader didn't flinch. A controlled, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. We trade, he answered, because we believe in cooperation, not subordination. But the foundation you claim to have built was never meant for us. It was designed to keep us reliant and silent. He leaned slightly closer to the camera. And now that we build our own foundation, you call it dangerous, not because it threatens people, but because it threatens control. The live audience murmured, a ripple of unease spreading through the room. Online, the comment section erupted again. Hashtag threatens control, hashtag stand up and listen. Trump let out a forced laugh, waving a dismissive hand. Control? Nobody's trying to control you. We are trying to protect you. That's what America does. We protect the world. And you know what? Deep down, you still need that protection. This time, Traoré's expression hardened. His eyes narrowed, his voice sharpened into a blade. Protection becomes control the moment. It is given without respect and taken without consent. If you truly believe in protection, then protect your own people first, from poverty, from division, from the illusion that the world still kneels at your feet. The moderator opened her mouth, but no words came. Around the world, living rooms and cafes erupted into an electrified silence. People weren't cheering, they were listening. Because for the first time, a head of state was refusing to bow in real time. On a Western broadcast, under the glare of Western lights, Trump shifted uncomfortably. He adjusted the microphone in front of him, his tone slipping into accusation. These countries love to talk about independence until something goes wrong. Then suddenly they come knocking on America's door. They expect us to fix it. So go ahead, refuse our help. Build your little schools and clinics. But when things fall apart, don't come running to us. Traoré waited, letting Trump's words echo into silence. Then he replied softly, calmly, yet the quiet cut sharper than any shout. You misunderstand. We are not refusing help. We are refusing ownership. Help offered as a weapon is not help, it's leverage. And freedom built on leverage is not freedom. He paused, letting his words sink in. And when something goes wrong, we will turn to our people, not to the ones who spent decades benefiting from our weakness. In the control room, the executive producer whispered to a colleague, he's not debating. He's redefining the terms. Back on screen, Trump tried to regain his footing. You think you sound strong, but in the end, you'll realize America still leads the world. Traoré's gaze pierced the lens. Then let the world decide. Let them watch who builds and who silences. The moderator exhaled audibly. She knew she wasn't moderating a debate anymore. She was witnessing a shift. Ath broadcast had barely survived its own explosion. The control room still smelled faintly of overheated wires and adrenaline. Producers barked instructions like battlefield commanders, cutting between camera feeds that trembled from the collective. breath of a world watching. And yet, in that chaos, Traoré sat straighter than ever, his voice carrying the weight of silence itself. Across from him, the man who had once been untouchable, master of wealth, networks, invisible influence, looked cornered in a way no journalist, no protest, no book had ever managed to achieve. George Soros' eyes darted, but every lens was locked onto him. Every syllable now a trial in front of billions. Mr. Soros, Traoré said, his tone cutting like sharpened steel wrapped in velvet. You claimed to defend democracy, but what you built was dependency. Entire governments danced not to the will of their people, but to the quiet rhythm of your foundations. Tell me, how is that different from empire? The words hit like a verdict. The audience erupted again, not in applause this time, but in a low rumble, a chorus of recognition. Soros adjusted his tie. His hands, once steady in boardrooms, now trembled slightly as he leaned toward the microphone. Empires conquer, he said, voice strained yet calculated. I funded liberation. Eastern Europe tore down its walls not because of coercion, but because people believed in freedom. I did not dictate their will, I enabled it. Traoré didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward the audience, then back at Soros. And yet, he pressed, your money outlived their revolutions. When the Berlin Wall fell, it was not just liberty that rushed in, it was markets, privatization, foreign investors who arrived faster than the bricks hit the ground. You made sure of that. People traded one kind of dependency for another. You call it freedom. I call it capture. The moderator tried to intervene. Gentlemen, if we could, but the studio had already decided whose voice carried authority. The audience roared at Traoré's last word, a visceral eruption that drowned out the moderator completely. Soros' jaw tightened. His empire was built for moments like this, deflections, rationalizations, the ability to outlast storms. But something about Traoré was different. This wasn't a journalist with deadlines. This was resistance, distilled into a single man who had nothing to lose and millions to speak for. Soros leaned in again. His voice grew darker, more candid, almost confessorial. You think money is the villain, he said. But look at your world. War, famine, climate collapse. Without capital, without the networks I built, those cracks would swallow entire nations. If I didn't step in, others would. And they would not care about rights, or voices, or dignity. I am not a saint, Mr. Traoré, but I am the lesser evil. A silence swept through the hall, different now, heavier, as though Soros had laid bare something unspoken but deeply known. Traoré's response was slow, deliberate. The lesser evil, he repeated. That is the creed of tyrants. That is the whisper of every ruler who justified chains. Because the alternative was chaos. And yet here you sit, insisting that without you, the world collapses. No, Mr. Soros. The world collapses because men, like you, convinced it, that it cannot stand without you. The cameras zoomed closer. The confrontation was no longer about two men. It had become an archetype, empire versus resistance, capital versus sovereignty, narrative versus truth. Suddenly, from the back of the studio, a figure moved. A producer shouted off MIC. Security rushed toward the stage. But before anyone could stop it, a voice cut through the tension. He's right. The room froze. The outburst came not from a protester, but from one of the invited economic experts, an analyst from South America, credentialed and well-suited, who had been seated on the panel's outer ring. His face was pale, but his voice firm. I worked with your organizations, the man continued, pointing at Soros. I saw the contracts, the conditions, aid with strings, grants that came with quiet clauses. You don't liberate nations, you purchase them. The audience gasped. Chaos rippled across the broadcast as moderators scrambled. But it was too late. The feed had already captured the moment. Hashtags exploded across the globe. Traoré turned toward the man briefly, then back at Soros. Do you hear them now? He asked, voice rising. The silence you bought with checks is breaking. The truth leaks, Mr. Soros. No foundation is strong enough to hold it forever. For the first time that night, Soros' composure cracked. His lips parted, searching for words, but none came fast enough. The audience smelled blood. And then Traoré delivered the line that would echo across every headline, every replay, every street corner debate. You thought you were history's author. Tonight, you are merely its footnote. The eruption that followed shook the studio itself. Applause, chants, the pounding of feet. History was not written in silence. It was being carved live on air. But even as the noise surged, the control room operators noticed something chilling. The feed was flickering. A signal interference. Somewhere, someone was trying to cut the broadcast. And that was when the true battle be the studio no longer felt like a television stage. It had become an arena. The air, saturated with tension, hummed with the electric charge of billions of eyes watching. Every camera was a blade, every word a strike. Traoré and Netanyahu were no longer just two men in a debate. They were the embodiment of clashing worlds. Enough with your sanctimonious preaching. Netanyahu snapped, his hand cutting through the air. You sit there, judging from your little seat in Ouagadougou, while the entire Middle East burns. You don't understand the weight of leadership, the necessity of hard choices. Traoré didn't flinch. His voice, calm yet thunderous, cut through the studio's heat. Leadership is not the right to bomb children. Leadership is not using history as a shield to commit atrocities in the present. If you think slaughter can be disguised as strategy, then you are not a leader, you are a butcher wearing a suit. The studio gasped. Even the technicians, usually immune to spectacle, froze mid-movement. The moderator, pale and trembling, attempted to intervene. Gentlemen, please. But the words drowned as Netanyahu leaned forward, his face taut with fury. You dare lecture me? You, who governs a country with little influence, who relies on scraps of aid. Burkina Faso has no seat at the table of power. You do not understand what it means to protect a people surrounded by enemies. Traoré's lips curled into the faintest smile, a mixture of pity and defiance. Ah, but you see, that is where you are wrong. My people know enemies, not of borders, but of hunger, of debt, of colonial hands that never left. And still, we do not bomb the innocent. We do not bulldoze homes. We do not turn trauma into justification for tyranny. If size defines justice, then you are nothing more than a giant bully. The audience in the studio erupted, half clapping, half shouting. Online, the clash went nuclear. Hashtags like #TraorésNetanyahu and #TruthOnAir stormed across platforms. Every nation, every political bloc, every hidden lobby was glued to the feed. The world reacts in real time. In Washington, the Situation Room was alight with chatter. A general leaned toward the president's advisor. This man, Traoré, he's not just speaking. He's igniting. Look at social media. Our entire Middle East policy is being dismantled live. In Paris, Macron's aides whispered nervously. If he keeps this up, the French presence in Africa will face uprisings. He's exposing too much, too openly. And in Tel Aviv, senior Israeli officials huddled around Netanyahu's advisors, their faces tense. His destabilizing support. Our allies are hesitating. Every sentence he utters cuts into our narrative. Back in the studio, Netanyahu slammed the table. Do you know how many of my people live under the shadow of rockets? Do you know how it feels to bury children killed by terrorists? Traoré leaned in, his voice sharp as steel. Yes, but unlike you, I do not choose to create 10 more terrorists for everyone I fight. Unlike you, I do not flatten cities and call it security. Your bombs are not shields, they are seeds. Seeds that will grow into anger, into revenge, into generations who will never forgive you. And then you will cry again, and the cycle will continue. Tell me, is that strategy or madness? Netanyahu faltered, if only for a second. The cameras caught it, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt. Traoré pressed on, his words relentless. You hide behind fear. But fear is not a policy. Fear is a prison, and you have locked both Palestinians and Israelis inside it. And the key, Prime Minister, is in your hand, but you refuse to turn it, because you profit from the prison. The studio audience was no longer neutral. Applause broke out, loud and sustained. The moderator's pleas for order went ignored. A global flashpoint. At that very moment, protests erupted worldwide. In Dakar, in Cairo, in Johannesburg, crowds filled the streets, chanting Traoré's name. In New York and London, demonstrators outside embassies projected the live debate onto buildings. The chants spread like wildfire. Truth, truth, truth. Governments scrambled. Statements were drafted. Press conferences prepared. Diplomats called each other in panic. A single debate had turned into an international crisis. The personal strikes. Netanyahu, realizing he was losing ground, changed tactics. You speak of morality, but what about your alliances? You work with Moscow, with juntas, with men whose hands are as bloody as any. Do not pretend you are pure. Traoré's response was immediate. I do not claim purity. I claim honesty. My people know who we are, where we stand. We do not disguise occupation as democracy. We do not pretend colonization is liberation. At least when I shake hands with Russia. I do not call it peace while dropping bombs on neighbors. The blow landed. Netanyahu's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening on the desk. Escalation to the breaking point. Enough. Netanyahu shouted, his voice rising to a roar. You think you can humiliate me on live television? You think history will remember your little speeches? History will remember that Israel survives because men like me have the courage to do what weak men like you will never do. The words echoed, heavy and dangerous. Traoré rose slowly from his chair. The cameras followed, framing him in a posture that seemed larger than life. He looked directly into the lens, as if addressing not just Netanyahu, but the entire planet. History will remember, yes. It will remember who chose bombs over dialogue, who chose walls over bridges, who chose fear over humanity, and it will remember who stood against it, not with armies, but with words, not with weapons, but with truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Netanyahu, red with fury, was frozen. The collapse of control. The moderator's earpiece crackled violently. Producers were screaming. News channels worldwide cut from analysis panels to full live coverage. The debate was no longer a program. It was the story of the decade. In the streets of Gaza, fireworks exploded as crowds cheered Traoré's words. In Tel Aviv, counter-protests surged, flags waved, slogans screamed. The entire region trembled, teetering on the edge. The final exchange. Netanyahu, desperate, hurled his last card. You are a demagogue. You are nothing. When the dust settles, power will decide, not words. Traoré stepped closer, his voice low but cutting like glass. Then may the dust choke those who worship power. Because when the dust clears, only truth remains. And truth, Prime Minister, is the one enemy you cannot bomb. The studio erupted. The feed cut in and out as networks struggled to handle the chaos of reactions. Aftermath. By the time the broadcast ended, the world was no longer the same. Stock markets dipped, alliances wavered. Governments released hurried statements. The Middle East quaked with protests. Africa roared with newfound pride. And the West stumbled to control the narrative. And Traoré, calm, composed, resolute, walked out of the studio not as a president of a small nation, but as a figure of defiance whose words had shaken empires.